David Brewster here, new Brewster's Millions of Rants, and this is From Zero to Hero, Secrets of the Volume Knob. And this episode is going to basically revolve around, a very interesting and inspiring technique or trick on the guitar, and that's manipulating the volume control. And whether you're doing that with the volume pedal with your foot, or literally manually, adjusting the potentiometer or volume knob on your guitar, it creates this really interesting, almost flute-like, mysterious, kind of almost scary sounding, effect on the guitar. And you can do it with single notes, and kind of create these flute-like, sounds. You can use double stops and groups of notes, chords, with distortion or overdrive. It almost has like a lion roar, when you kind of swell your volume control like that. Think of the band Tool. Definitely Adam Jones does lots of volume, volume swells. But this technique, definitely came to my, attention when I heard Cathedral by Van Halen. And I think I definitely was a teenager watching Live Without a Net at home. And during, Eddie's famous, guitar solo during that concert, he goes through it all, Spanish Fly and Eruption, and eventually does this extended, Cathedral solo. And it blew my mind, watching him do his thing. And as a kid, I thought, what is he doing? It didn't sound like a guitar. It sounded like a keyboard or an organ or something like that. Or a cello, very, very cool. And definitely, Van Halen definitely kind of brought this, idea or concept to my attention. And then I noticed there's tons of guitarists out there that have added this little trick or secret to their music. So that's what this episode's going to focus on. So Eddie famously used the volume knob or control, here on his guitar. And then other guitarists have famously used volume pedals, on their pedal board, at their feet. And another, defining moment with these volume swells was when I was a student at AIM in Atlanta, and Steve Morse and Dave LaRue came and did a clinic. And I remember, we were watching them kind of do a sound check, and all the students were there early, and they were hanging out, and talking and stuff like that. But then, Steve setting up his pedal board, and we noticed, all the students were just watching, him put his rig together, and he had 3 volume pedals. And we were like, why does he have 3 volume pedals? And it was so confusing. And during his clinic, finally one of the students asked, like, hey, why do you have 3 volume pedals? And then Steve demonstrated, and it was the coolest demonstration. He was like, oh, I have delay, sync to one of these, and I think one was actual volume, one was delay. I don't remember what the other one was for, but he demonstrated it. And he played a melodic line without anything, and then he did it again, and he started swelling in using those volume pedals. And it brought like certain notes where he was bending and, holding it with vibrato. He would push the pedal in and bring in all this reverb and delay, and it sounded massive. And then he would like sweep it off and then do a fast lick, and then he would do it again, and he would add all that delay with these huge bends and stuff. So definitely Steve Morse is a volume pedal master. Now, if you start digging around in rock music, hard rock, and metal, music history, you'll find lots of examples of these volume swells, whether it's, the volume knob on your guitar or a volume pedal. And here's an image with some songs and bands that prominently feature, these volume swell actions and ideas on the guitar. And keep in mind, this is not a complete list. I didn't list every song that has a volume swell, but I wanted to include different bands from different decades, and just a really good, assortment of different music you can find these volume swells. But keep in mind, there's tons of other songs aside from this. I didn't include, Yngwie's Echo Etude or Pink Floyd, so there's some noticeable omissions here. But check this out if you want to dig around for some volume swells. I wanted to add this part mainly just to help anybody out there that's wanting to play with this, maybe with a volume pot on your guitar, and you discover that it's noisy or crackly or dirty when you move your volume control, which is very common. The electronics on an electric guitar is just it just attracts dust and dirt, so that's why it gets kind of dirty and crackly. But one thing you can actually use, it's called Deoxit, and it's a spray, and you can actually use it to spray the potentiometers or pots inside your guitar. So here's an old dirty, pot that I have. But what you want to do, and I'm going to do this on camera, there's actually a little spot right there where you can actually see inside, like all the little parts that are turning. That's where you want to spray. You don't want to spray this part. You want to spray right in that little hole right there, that crack. So you're going to have to open up your guitar, kind of maneuver things around to where you can, basically find that little spot, and then just soak it, and then turn your knob back and forth, and then soak it again. and that should clean up any dust or dirt that's in your pot. Now I did find a video, I think this was from last year, and I wish I would have, either saved it or written down like who it was. It could have been Billy Gibbons, or maybe Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick, but it was one of those videos, I think it's the collection from Gibson, and it was going through their large guitar collection, and somewhere in that video they pulled out an old Strat from the 50s, like late 50s. They took it, they grabbed a can of this, and they just soaked that pot. I mean, they just, and I was sitting there watching it like they sprayed like half a can into that volume pot, and I thought, oh my gosh, because I never use that much. I usually just do turn it, and then one more. But this video, they were literally just soaking that pot, turning it, it was dripping and stuff, and then they plugged that guitar in and started playing it. So that's an exception. I don't usually use that much of Deoxit, but that definitely will help clean things up as far as your volume and tone pots. So the music in this episode is going to come from an assortment of different albums, from different bands, from different decades too. Almost like the song list that I just showed, with the volume swell songs. I wanted to include some different, periods and time periods of music, different groups, different guitarists that have featured this. And once again, keep in mind, this is not a complete demonstration or a complete list that I shared earlier. Just some kind of notable or interesting areas that I kind of chose for this lesson. So here we go. The opening, that's the famous In Memory of Elizabeth Reed from the Allman Brothers, and that's Dickie Betts doing those volume swells. Dwayne Allman's the one playing, kind of comping the chords in the background. And the rhythm part, really, Dwayne's just playing an A minor 9. I think we had this chord progression in the Allman Brothers chord play episode, but that's an A minor 9 to an implied A minor 7, and then A minor 9 to an implied D6 over A. So it's really just, two bar chords mixed with this A minor 9. Something like that. And the live version on Live at the Fillmore East is noticeably different than the studio version. Dickie didn't do the volume swells on the studio version, but the live version he did. And you distinctly hear this. Actually bending and also doing volume swells there on the guitar. So I'm grabbing this A, bending that up, and doing a bend and release kind of slowly on that A to B, back to A, and also doing a volume swell there like this. So the trick there is you want to pick it right before you swell it. So pick and then swell. And you actually want to start the bend around the same time that you start to swell it open. So pick it first, and then swell and bend, and then release the bend at the same time. Something like that. Do it again on E right there. And then you hear this kind of dual bend, or like a double bend right here. Kind of a quick bend and release, and then bend it again, and then release it again. And then a half step bend on this F sharp. A swell on that E note right there. So that's the first part. Right? Almost like whale song or whale calls in the beginning. And then you hear this scale passage like this. E, F sharp to G, and you want to swell every note. And then F sharp, G to A, and swell every note. And then right here, B, C to D, and swell again. And then B, C to E, and swell all those notes. Then you hear a swell and a slide at the same time, this D to C. And then you're going to swell D, C to B. And then you're going to come down, grab this G twice. And then A, E, F sharp. Then you're going to grab this G, bend that up to A without swelling. That final E note right there, and that kind of signals the beginning of the song, and then Dickie starts playing a regular solo without the swells. But check out In Memory of Elizabeth Reed, the Live at Fillmore East version, and you can hear Dickie kind of displaying these distinct volume swells way back in the 70s, which is so cool. For another example of these volume swells from the Allman Brothers, check out the classic song Melissa. And you'll hear it's just two volume swelled notes, but it really adds this kind of powerful, emotional kind of punch to the song. And it's during the chorus, like this part. And that's the acoustic guitar, of course. But when you hear that chorus, you distinctly hear this volume swell right here. And then you hear, right? It almost sounds like a pedal steel or this kind of twangy country sound. And it's during that, you know, famous chorus part. And right there, you're literally grabbing a B and you want to volume swell that. Then you're going to grab this F sharp and you're bending that up a whole step and back, and you're going to volume swell there too. I'm sorry, you don't want to go back. You want to hold that bend, that F sharp up the G sharp. My bad. And there's some, you know, a little bit of vibrato there too. A very simple example, but a very famous, you know, volume swell manipulation right there. What about the intro to Foxy Lady from Jimi Hendrix? You know, another very famous volume swell moment. And this is, you know, late 60s technically. And here you can hear Hendrix, you know, grabbing this F sharp with the volume off. Grabs that note and starts shaking it frantically with some vibrato, and then he brings the volume control on. And there's lots of fuzz and overdrive and stuff at the end, like this. Or whatever, for Foxy Lady. And you're literally just making this kind of weird, erratic noise there in the beginning. Just grab this F sharp and shake it frantically with vibrato, and then just slowly bring in your volume control. And all this handling noise from your fret hand, you know, the shaky kind of sound of the string against the fretboard and the other strings kind of, you know, chiming in there a little bit. That's part of it. You know, you're really just making this explosive noise. And the more noise, the better, technically, because it's Foxy Lady. Now, what about volume swells with chords instead of single notes like we've seen so far? And this is the intro from Pardon Me from the band Incubus, you know, classic song. And you can definitely hear these distinct, you know, volume swelled chords in the beginning like this. You know, something like that. So you're actually starting with this. That's a C sharp minor 7 right there implied. And then that partial, it's like a, you know, C sharp minor 7, it's the fretted C sharp E, this B note, and then also the open B right there. So it's the middle 4 strings, and you want to strum that chord and then swell the volume control right there. That same chord and then add an A right there. That's going to change it to an A add 9 and do the same thing. Strum everything up to that open B. Don't play the high E there. Then do the first chord again, that C sharp minor 7. The last time right there, just scoot up to the 6th fret for that C sharp, play the open B and the open high E. Like that. And you've got this. Sound like a guitar. It sounds like some weird synth keyboard effect. Really cool. Now, what about the mighty Van Halen and Cathedral that I mentioned earlier in this episode? And definitely, if you're into this, you know, volume swell action and you haven't learned Cathedral yet, dive in. You know, take the time to work on Cathedral, because Eddie breaks down all sorts of interesting, you know, techniques and approaches using this volume swell action. And for this opening for Cathedral, it has this very mysterious and haunting kind of sound with these volume swells. I think we actually broke this down in the Eddie Van Halen Sus Chord Secrets episode. But, you know, the intro for Cathedral is like this. You know, something like that. And it basically starts with this stacked C major 7 over G right there. Basically strum that chord, swell the chord, you know, swell your volume control open, and then close it like that. So you're just swelling swelling and then, you know, turning the volume control off. And then an F over C right here. Do that C major 7 over G again. And then swell a C5 power chord to a B sus4 right there. So that first pass of chords. Again, C major 7 over G, F over C, and then that's C5, and then end on a B5 or a B power chord right there. And then that moves into the next section of that solo. You know, classic volume swell moment right there. The next example comes from the song Villa Strangiato from Rush, and once again, almost like the Allman Brothers tune, the studio version of this song is noticeably different than the live version. And the live version I'm, you know, basically drawing on here came from Exit Stage Left, which is on the wall right there. Arguably my favorite Rush album. It's great. But the studio version, actually Alex is playing a nylon string guitar, kind of Spanish or flamenco style. Live, he's playing electric guitar using volume swells for this intro, like this. Kind of flavor once again, and there's some delay, you know, kind of swirling around and stuff. But grab this F sharp, swell that open, grab A right there on the high E, swell that open, D sharp back to F sharp. So that's the first little melody, but you're doing it with swells like that. And then you want to basically swell this chord. It's an E5 stack, so the low E open, 2nd fret A, 2nd fret D, 4th fret on the G. Swell that open and then close it, or you know, shut your volume off, and then start it again and do A, D sharp to F sharp single notes, and then the E5 power chord again, and then the song starts right there and he stops swelling. But one more time with the intro. When the solo section starts, it actually does more volume swells, and this is right after the chord hit section when everything kind of slows down. It goes from F to A, like that part. And during that part, you distinctly hear Alex, you know, begin his solo with swells like this. Something like that, almost like cat calls or whale song, and that's a D, you know, bent up to E and then released, but you're also doing a volume swell in there. And then the same thing, A bent up to B and then release it with a volume swell. And it has this mysterious kind of crying kind of sound. And then you hear like a little melodic line. So start on that F, G to E, and then D, E to C, D to B, and then D, C to A. And then you hear something like that. And definitely Alex Lifeson did, you know, volume swells in other Rush songs. Think Xanadu and some of those other tunes. But La Villa Strangiato is great. That's a magical, you know, Rush instrumental right there. The next example comes from the song The Big Picture from King's X, and this is from the King's X album, which is a great album. And, you know, here we've looked at Ty on this channel a few times before. In his 3-for-all, we were actually doing some EBO, you know, stuff, and now we're doing some volume swells from him. But this is a great example of actually using volume swells during a guitar solo, which is what this is. Something like this. Solo after that. But one more time there. B to C right there in the opening. And you distinctly hear a volume swell on this D note, and this little melodic line. So that D, E, F sharp, G, and then end on that F sharp. And then G to E. And then you hear this little C to D, and then go to G right there. So you hear the C, D, G, D, and then end on F sharp. And there's that little wicked kind of legato lick right after that. But that's a great song and a great guitar solo using some volume swells. All right, last but not least is the song Scarred from Dream Theater, and this came from the album Awake. You know, one of my favorite Dream Theater albums for sure. It's a great one. And there's some interesting things happening here once again, and I've used the words mysterious and haunting a few times during this episode, you know, regarding these volume swells. And this is the epitome of those haunting, mysterious volume swells. And during the intro, John Myung's actually playing a tapped, you know, bass part, and then John Petrucci comes in with these swells. And I know John actually uses a volume pedal, much like Steve Morse. And I've seen, you know, Dream Theater live a few times, and I remember seeing, you know, volume pedals on stage or on his pedal board, and some concert, you know, DVDs and footage at home, you know, watching him play. So I know he does prefer volume pedals, but I'm just going to use my volume knob here. So here's the looped John Myung bass part played on guitar, looped with a TC Electronic Diddle looper, and I'm just going to come in with these haunting and kind of scary, you know, volume swells like this. Really cool. And the bass part's basically kind of playing around with this B, and there's some tapped, you know, implied chords happening there. But then the guitar part, you're literally grabbing this E way up here on the, it's all on the B string for the most part. Grab this E and swell, you know, into that. And you're basically swelling your volume control open and then closed. So it's open and closed on all these notes. And then grab a B, and then C sharp, F sharp, G sharp, then grab this D on the G string. I was wrong earlier. There's actually, you know, a note that's not on the B string. It's this D note. You're going to bend that up and down like that. Then you're going to return to this E note, and then you want to basically gradually bend it up a whole step. And then a B, that C sharp again. Now grab this F sharp, and you're going to bend that up a whole step and slowly return it back down to F sharp. Like that. Really cool, especially with that bass part kind of adding that kind of implied chord progression. That's going to wrap this episode of Brewster's Millions of Rants with From Zero to Hero, Secrets of the Volume Knob, which these aren't really secrets. I mean, if you really pay attention and notice, you know, all these volume swelled, you know, actions and ideas on guitar, they go way back. The Beatles and obviously Hendrix, and, you know, I've kind of supplied some different ideas here. Definitely early Genesis, Steve Hackett, Steve Morse. We've already talked about Van Halen and John Petrucci and some of these players. But there's tons of volume swell action out there. You just have to really pay attention. Really keep your eyes and ears open for these sounds, because sometimes you might hear it thinking, oh, it's like a keyboard or some studio trick, where it might actually be the guitar, you know, or the guitarist using his imagination, some effects, volume swells, EBOs, slides. There's all kinds of stuff you can do to create these unusual and otherworldly sounds on the guitar, which is so inspiring and eye-opening. Like, wow, did he play that on guitar? That's so cool. Listen to that. I love stuff like this. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.